Hello everyone, and welcome back to Bitcoin. Welcome back to Bitcoin is a series of conversations we're hosting here at Botanix, where we talk to all of the talented founders who are redirecting their creativity to the most OG blockchain in the world, the most liquid, the most decentralized, and censorship resistant one out there. That is Bitcoin. I'm Alicia Painter, one of the founders of Botanix, and today I'm joined by Corey from Dolomite. Hi, Corey.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
We're very lucky to have you here. So, Corey, just to first kick it off, could you give folks an introduction to you, how you got into crypto, and how you built Dolomite?
Sure. So I'm Corey Kaplan, one of the co-founders of Dolomite, and my story with crypto began back in 2015. At the time, I was building some game modding and exploitation software, and the company whose game I was modding shut me down on PayPal, so I started taking Bitcoin for payment then. It's the natural solution to dealing
The
with such
OG,
problems.
the
Yeah,
OG
yeah.
of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I feel like back then there was a couple of ways that people got into crypto and in particular Bitcoin, and gaming was certainly one of them.
Yes.
And it was this light bulb moment where you take Bitcoin over the internet, no middleman, no intermediary, or anyone that could stop you, and it's just like the big brain exploding moment, and you're just sitting there saying, "Oh my God, this is crazy," and it felt magical, using it for the first time and being able to actually like use it for its original and intended purpose. It wasn't an investment vehicle. It was purely being used just for payment and censorship resistant money, which is really, really cool. I feel like there's not enough of that these days.
It's because the price of Bitcoin keeps going up.
I know, so that no one wants to get rid of their Bitcoin. It's a perfect catch 22 with it.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot actually at Botanix because the Bitcoin white paper, it's meant to be peer-to-peer electronic cash. All of the cryptographic research that went into Bitcoin was from the early progenitors of electronic cash, and it's meant to be used as cash. And it is not being used as cash largely now. And that's something that we're at least hoping to change. But actually, how did you first get that Bitcoin back then in 2015?
Set up a wallet service where people would send Bitcoin over to it,
Oh,
and I would
okay.
just basically off ramp it through services like Coinbase and take cash out. So pretty standard process. But I unfortunately was not a part of the smart bunch that held onto that Bitcoin at the time because I saw it as just a payment mechanism. I didn't see it as a as an investment vehicle, but you live and learn.
You live and learn. Yeah, I made that mistake myself. All right, so that's how you first got started in Bitcoin, and then how did that lead you? How did that cascade of events lead you to building Dolomite?
Yeah, so that story I mentioned happened while I was in college and was going to school at the time at Lehigh University over in Pennsylvania for a dual degree program in computer science and business. So, there was a very natural inclination towards building things and clearly seeing crypto rise up with this idea of programmable money was really interesting. So, I was around at that point for the rise of Ethereum and in the Ethereum virtual machine, and being able to build early stuff on that felt like being a little kid in a candy store per se. We had all these different things that were being built out for what was called open finance, which was the
Yes.
precursor to DeFi.
Hmm.
And myself and my co-founder Adam found ourselves contributing to a couple of open source protocols because everyone had all these crazy ideas at the time and stuff they wanted to do, but none of these protocols were really ready yet. At the time, you had like Ether Delta for trading in a
Right.
decentralized way, but beyond that, there was like really nothing else. So all these ideas floating around, not enough people actually executing on them. So we found ourselves contributing to a couple of these protocols, and we ended up doing such a large volume of work for one of them, which was called Loopring at the time, that the founder decided to invest in us as a company instead of just giving us a bounty. And we actually started Dolomite at that point as an accidental business. So we've been around officially since like early 2018 or so, or late 2017. Um, and went through one previous product iteration with a pure DEX. Now we're a money market protocol, of course. That's our flagship and leading product, but been around for a long time and have built a lot of stuff over the years.
Very OG, and congratulations on your token recently. Very excited for that as a Dolomite user. Um,
Thank you.
Actually, yeah, I know you've been around for a while, and especially the OG DeFi DGen days. What would you say was like your most unhinged DGen moment from like the early days?
I mean, probably all like the pool two farming from DeFi Summer. It was
Okay.
just a crazy time, like using using Sushi Swap initially that was being forked. If you guys
Yes.
remember, actually, like when Curve Finance launched, someone else deployed the contracts instead of Bitch because they couldn't wait for him to go do it. And then
Wow, I did not know
Bitch
that.
on Twitter is like, well, I guess this is like the actual protocol now. Like all the code is the same, so I guess we'll just use this instead. Like it was just a wild time of like the good builders were doing like a very unhealthy mix of like testing and production and deploying stuff quickly. The
Yeah.
bad builders were just rushing things out and using
Hmm.
production as a test environment purely, yeah, purely as that. And then like seeing all the yield aggregators get built on top of it, there was like this massive realization all of a sudden where like the on-chain world can be like its own economy,
Yeah.
and we're gonna go rebuild all of finance on top of there, and
Yeah.
then it's gonna fan out. And we've seen like so many things come and go over the years, but like the big players have stayed the same of like Curve Finance, Uniswap, Aave. Um, Urine is still a thing, and they still like do modestly well despite like yield farming through
Hmm.
aggregators not being as popular. So like it's really cool to see like the staying power of these because like you don't typically see crypto based businesses like survive the test of time like this. Certainly through bear markets, it's not easy. So it's really cool to see like not only like these self sustaining on chain economies have popped up, but like the businesses built on top of them have largely stayed around also.
Yes. And actually, as someone who's seen the wild west of crypto to what it is, today over the past 10 years, what do you think has changed in terms of especially builder culture, right? How do you think that's changed? Do you think crypto has grown up? Do you think it still has a lot of growing up to do? Where do you think we are at in terms of adoption cycle and our professionalization cycle, maybe?
I think there's been a lot of maturity like in crypto,
Mhm.
in particular in DeFi over the past couple of years. And some of that's because of crypto culture. Like the culture in crypto, as you know, like there's a lot of like people that are really in it for the tech or the
Right.
messaging and the culture behind Bitcoin. But there's also like that third unfortunate group that's like very mercenary and super speculative by nature. Or I should say opportunistic too. And like for a while, like DeFi was like the very hot and spotlight thing where like everyone that was like very opportunistic and mercenary were trying to like build like a DeFi business
Right.
and try to get some massive valuation number, potentially rug users and do bad stuff like that. Generally, I think a lot of that activity has shifted towards memes because they're so much easier to run as a business because there really is no business and there's no promises around it. It's just a meme. Which means that a lot of the people that have remained in like the DeFi subsector of crypto are largely like much more serious builders.
Right.
The easy times of like launching a token and having like massive valuations are mostly over. You have to have a revenue generating business, you have to have sticky users, you have to have a justification for existence. So like that right there resembles a very large step forward in terms of like overall maturity, I would say. Is there a lot more growing up and maturing we could do as an industry? Like absolutely. And I think that stuff like that is still happening with like when the institutions are starting to like dip their toes into the on-chain world, like we see with like BlackRock and their build fund and whatnot. So those things are still happening, and like it's going to be a journey, not necessarily so focused on the destination.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned a lot about builders and, especially a bunch of these crypto companies that have already stood the test of time. I always like to say that I think yeah, there aren't as many builders as we think, right? And it's really hard as well to innovate within DeFi. And obviously, you've innovated within lending protocols, which are notoriously the most difficult, right? Because they tend to be the most fallible, as well. So, how have you approached security within Dolomite, and how have you approached DeFi differentiation compared to other lending protocols out there?
Yeah, so I think like the first thing is like we have a very engineering oriented culture at Dolomite,
Mhm.
and our process for how we like take an idea, materialize it in smart contract form, and roll it out is a large process in and of itself. So we make sure like any of the smart contracts you write are rigorously reviewed. We have everything like must have at least 100% test coverage. Needs to go through proper integration testing. The process for rolling it out also is meticulously crafted, like with our DevOps pipeline that we have in place to ensure there's no configuration issues. The key thing is like we have a very robust understanding at this point of the entire process of going from like an idea in our head to something on paper and something actually getting rolled out. And the crappy part with it is like there's no shortcuts in terms of time, because even
Mm-hmm.
if you have like the biggest team in the world that you can parallelize everything, it still takes time to do these steps and these process, and like potentially for the security audits to be done or other steps involving the rollout process. So like where we have a lot of like foot speed in terms of our ideas and our ability to execute, like we are definitely slower because of like these processes take time, and like we can't rush the deployment for this
Absolutely.
stuff at all. So like for us, like a lot of the ideas that we have in terms of like our innovations have largely come from us being DeFi users and like very like on-chain native ourselves, and thinking to ourselves like, why doesn't this exist? Like I can just go build this and it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
We're not necessarily trying to like innovate in a way that we're breaking the laws of nature. We're innovating in ways that we think we're combining pieces that haven't been combined before. And there's a very big difference between like those two things I just said. When you try to like say that crypto and blockchain could like solve things that aren't physically possible, well, yeah, if you try to do something like that, you're gonna end up getting exploited in some way or open up some economic vulnerability, which usually ends up happening. But when you're trying to just combine puzzle pieces together in interesting ways, it mostly boils down to like an integration. Like, can your architecture support it? Are you doing it like in a safe and feasible way? Versus, are you doing something that's like trying to once again break the laws of nature and then you get exploited because of it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that makes a ton of sense. And one thing I noticed that crypto tends to do a lot of is reinvent the wheel. It's like, oh no, let's do it completely from scratch, right? And I think that's one of the fundamental errors you see all across the crypto ecosystem. At least I've seen it when I used to work in the Ethereum ecosystem quite a bit. But along that point, I guess, what is your take on the current major blockchains right now? So if you're to compare Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus, let's say, a Solana, what is your take on what it's like to build on these and the opportunity within these different blockchains?
So I generally look at like I think it's easier to talk about Solana and Ethereum first. We talk about like Bitcoin after as like the new beast entering the room in this regard. Um, but like so far, like for Solana, if like you want to just build an app, like it's a great place to go build.
Mm-hmm.
Simply put, because of like how their fee markets work, how scalable the chain is, um, and like generally how like the developer culture is at the moment. Like a standalone application, great place to go build right now. If you want to build something that needs like a culture, more community, composability around the rest of the DeFi ecosystem, and plugging into like more mature rails that have like deep access to liquidity, tons of institutional plugin, a hot ball of money ready to get deployed into your platform, Ethereum is still the place to go. And like there's specific reasons for that, like on a technical level as well
Right,
as like a bit of a cultural level, like why that's the case.
right,
Technically speaking, a lot of that's possible with Solana also, but like the culture isn't quite there. And because like I just mentioned, like their fee structure and their tech is more built around this idea of like you can build a super fast
right.
isolated application. Like that's what we've seen get built so far.
Mm-hmm.
And like where Bitcoin has been like so far, a lot of the programmability you've had on there for stuff that you could have built before, like felt more like programming on like a TI calculator. Like it's like not the way that you want to do things. And like in order to build something that's like of material consequence, like or like a substantial business, requires like a hefty amount of engineering, a lots of like what I would consider to be like anti patterns in order to like get things up and running, and it's like not a scalable way to like run a business. There is a massive unlock, massive potential for doing it though, but like to my knowledge, like not too many people have really cracked the code on that yet.
Absolutely.
Botanix to me represents, if we want to start bleeding into that part of the conversation now, like to me, like Botanix represents that first credible movement in that direction of being able to unlock real business on Bitcoin, and tons of idle capital and users that have been either like blocked off of the market and really can't access like decentralized and trustless services, or had to bend the knee and instead work with more centralized funds like BlockFi, which has had its own share of catastrophes because of the lack of virtue around centralization for these financial services.
Right. No, you touched upon a lot of things there. Really interestingly, in the beginning, when we were looking at Bitcoin, so this was 2.5 years ago, and we were looking at Bitcoin scaling, everyone was trying to build their own VM instead of using the EVM on Bitcoin and just getting to that initial insight of, hey, let's just bring EVM to Bitcoin and be able to unlock the decade of work that's been put into building a lot of the applications out there was huge. And then doing so in a decentralized way was also huge because you brought up,
Yeah.
BlockFi, right? A lot of Bitcoiners were using that service, highly centralized, and it just showed the fallibility again of centralized systems.
Yeah.
So
I think like plenty of people can look at using the EVM for something like this as like a false start because a lot of
yes,
Bitcoiners obviously don't like Ethereum for various reasons, and some of them, of course, being very credible reasons. But the important thing is like, the only thing that's really Ethereum about it at this point, like how it's being utilized, is just the name. Like
exactly.
beyond that, it's not being utilized as anything Ethereum oriented whatsoever, and there's no value accrual back to Ethereum the way that's being utilized at all.
Hmm.
It's really like a Bitcoin VM, but just with Solidity smart contracts on it, the way I look at it, which is
Absolutely.
great for us because like when you think about like the businesses that have been built at this point and the user experience that users require nowadays, it's it's the wallets that connect to the smart contracts. It's all the hardware wallets that exist that are able to detect like phishing attempts and other security practices that are important for keeping users' funds secure. It's the indexing services that exist for us to create a really snappy and well-performant application that users come to expect nowadays. It's all the DevOps processes involved on our end with how we're able to like test things out before deploying them. There's so many things involved with running a business like Dolomite and being able to plug into like the EVM, or I guess we should start calling it now, like the Bitcoin VM with um, as like a Bitcoin scaling solution, and with for
Yes,
us to be able to use Solidity smart contracts and that programming model is invaluable to be able to move quickly and be able to cater to the Bitcoiners that have been underserved in this market.
absolutely. And Dolomite is going to speak very much so to them because after interviewing like hundreds of Bitcoiners, the one thing they say is, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. I want to use it as collateral to be able to borrow assets that they actually do want to use. Right. So I think that's going to be one of the main use cases that everyone's excited about. So we're obviously very happy to have Dolomite serving that function. But are there other things that you think are really cool or specific to Bitcoin? Because you've been in Bitcoin since the beginning and you understand how the user profile is maybe a little bit different than
So what
other
I'm
ecosystems.
I think it comes in stages. Like the thing I'm most excited for on day one is like already, as you put it, like that really simple
Yeah.
yet beautiful use case of just go borrow against your Bitcoin without
Mhm.
using a centralized business and bankruptcy rules and other stuff like that to worry about. The
Yes.
second thing is like other platforms like GMX that have done a really great job building decentralized perp trading.
Mhm.
They're looking to bring native Bitcoin trading onto Botanix. And like as we know so far, like every attempt to bring Bitcoin to other programmable chains like Ethereum has been like at best a subpar solution, like a
Right.
WBTC. Other ones that are more elegant have a lot of cumbersome processes for like getting them over there, and just haven't had a lot of adoption, like TBTC. Ren BTC went down after like the Alameda and FTX collapse. So like
Right.
having access to this native Bitcoin collateral
Mhm.
that's programmable and can like already build upon the existing 10 years of infrastructure that Ethereum has trailblazed with the EVM is so valuable. And because of that, like it's going to open up good yield opportunities, not just for putting up Bitcoin collateral and going and borrowing USDT or other stables, but if you want to just deposit Bitcoin on Dolomite and earn yield off of it, there'll be a healthy amount of users that want to borrow your BTC and probably loop it into things like GMBTC, which is the
Yes.
counterparty vault for GMX trading, that produces good yields, and your assets are being borrowed for a high yielding opportunity that has some risk to it, but not to the point where you're worried about like the credit risk of the person who's borrowing your BTC. So
Exactly.
this is a use case we've seen do really well for Dolomite on our early days on Arbitrum, where like we typically have the highest native BTC yields across the chain, and usually across DeFi also, where like if you don't account for like governance tokens and other like inflationary rewards, um, because we're able to underwrite for some of those more complicated assets. So being able to bring that over to like Botanix with native Bitcoin collateral is just like it's really cool. And like there is no asset bigger than Bitcoin, and being able to underwrite for markets for it for all this really fun stuff is a massive unlock in tons of use cases that I think like is going to really like red pill the Bitcoin community, or I should say orange pill.
Orange pill. Yeah, I feel like I have these moments where it dawns on me the enormity of what we're hoping to accomplish, and how it can potentially engulf everything if if we get this right. Because from what we've seen, the moment you're able to build those rails in a way that's decentralized, in a way that's performant, that is what Bitcoin is looking for. And being able to enable that is truly, yeah, it's powerful on a magnitude that it's not comprehensible sometimes. Um, yeah, I think the last question I have for you is actually, what's been your most Bitcoin maxi moment recently? I know you play around with a lot of ecosystems, but have you had a moment recently where you were confronted again, maybe by the enormity of Bitcoin, and were like, wow, this is it.
I think like this bull market cycle in particular, there's been like a all roads lead back to Bitcoin
Yeah.
moment for a lot of people. Like, I started off in Bitcoin, then like had a lot of fun like playing around other ecosystems, starting with Ethereum, then going to other stuff. Because at the end of the day, like I approach everything from like an innovation first perspective, and I don't,
Mhm.
I want to like always be trying new things. Like I think like that's the fun part for me. It's like everything's still a technical marvel. But when you look at like a lot of like the things that have happened a bit from like a cultural perspective with like the rise in prominence of meme coins and how people are using crypto as a value extractive play and all that, like there's nothing more beautiful and elegant than Bitcoin at this point. Um,
Seriously.
and like I've grown tiresome by a lot of like these shell games and stuff that have been going on. And like to me, just going back to like just the basics of Bitcoin, the beauty of holding it, the scarcity behind it, the simple rules, how the rules don't change. It's just like it's a breath of fresh air and like what has become like a very hostile, like a lot of infighting environment, I would say, with like the broader crypto space when you look past Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin community still still in like a really good spot, I think, from like a cultural perspective and all that. But when we look at like the other subsectors of crypto, like how NFTs are doing right now, or how DeFi is doing right now, or how like Ethereum's doing right now, or what's going on with Solana culture wise, like um, they all have like their fair share of issues, and a lot of them are just like I said, very tiresome. And the way that things have just led back to Bitcoin for like that simplicity and like that, it's like that comfort food per se is like
Yes.
just like it's great and like
Yeah.
it's not so much a Bitcoin moment for me as much as it is like a Bitcoin realization or realization and a re-falling in love with it all over again.
That's incredible. Yeah, I don't know if you saw Vitalik tweeted recently. It's like, yeah, we should actually learn from Bitcoin and how simple it is. And it was just really ironic within the context of his conversation. But I think a lot of folks, both OG Bitcoiners as well as folks who went to Ethereum and are coming back to Bitcoin, are realizing like the simplicity and that kind of the boringness of Bitcoin is its biggest strength almost, and that's why it stood the test of time. So yeah, excited to do more with our Bitcoin. Last question, and then I promise to wrap it up. But do you still pay with your Bitcoin at all, or is it now all in cold storage?
Oh God, no, I don't pay with that. No, no way. No, that's what stable coins are for at this point. Like you got to keep in mind, like the times of using that, like using Bitcoin for payment, was a time where like there were no stable coins. The
Yes.
rails that we have right now were non-existent back then, and we've come so far. So yeah,
I still pay sometimes with Lightning, which is the Bitcoin payments protocol, but it is more just for exercising the original purpose of Bitcoin, right? And contributing to the Bitcoin economy rather than, yeah, making meaningful purchases. I think in order to enable Bitcoin payments or that broad, like there's a lot of other pieces that we need to bring together, which we're hoping to do with Botanix.
yeah,
Um,
I think like a really cool thing we can do in the future. I mean, the potential is there for it. Is like you put your Bitcoin up on Dolomite, you can borrow USDT or other stables against it,
yeah,
and you pay with card, and the card can be plugged into your Dolomite account, where your default approach is if you want to go spend money, it just goes ahead and it'll borrow against your Bitcoin. So you're
I mean, I
just
think we just started our next product, so let's let's make it happen. No, honestly,
uh,
that's like Corey, that is truly the number one use case that people want to do, right? Especially if there's like Bitcoin yield in the background that they're able to earn.
yeah, and
That's
that yield
what
is
they want to do.
denominated and paid out to you in Bitcoin in real time. Doesn't get
Yes,
better than that.
exactly. All right. Well, that's the alpha for folks who are tuning in. Thanks so much, Corey. We're super excited to have Dolomite on Botanix, and I'm going to be borrowing some staples day one on the platform. So excited for that as well.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, Corey.
Thank you again.